Today, windy, snow showers, high near 30. That's a heat wave. Winds have died down. They're going to be west 20 to 30 miles per hour. Chance of snow is 60%, but hopefully it will not stick. Tonight will be windy, snow showers. Tomorrow, Tuesday, at a high of 25. Windy with mostly cloudy skies. High near 25. Winds northwest at 20 to 30 miles per hour. Tuesday night, partly cloudy skies in the evening, then becoming cloudy overnight, with a few flurries are possible with a low of 21. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll have a lot of sun, which is wonderful to a lot of people. Still have clouds, highs, 30s, 40s. An inspirational for today is: a single sunbeam is enough to drive away many, many shadows. The author is unknown. Now to my co-host, T. Wayne. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Julia?
Absolutely marvelous.
Good to hear that. Starting the new year off right, I see.
Yes.
Well, again, just glad to be here on the program, and thank all those people that have been listening to us. As you know, the goal of this program is to educate all the aspiring radio broadcasters and speakers while delivering a dialogue around the community and current issues. In the interest of education, I have a great table talk tip today. May not be as much of a tip, but it's some great information that I think people want to know, especially those that may have young people in their lives that they're trying to help them get to where they need to get to in their careers. Anyway, this program that I'm going to tell you about is a Toastmaster program. It's called the New Youth Communication Program. And as I was reading over it in our Toastmasters magazine, they talked about that this had been requested by many of the Toastmasters and the general public. If any of you go to our Toastmasters meetings, you know we're always trying to get younger people to come in so that you can continue the legacy. So I thought this program was very timely. Anyway, they talked about back in 1965, they created a mini program for youth, and it kind of scraped the surface about what goes on as far as being a Toastmaster. But this new program that they've developed, it's a new curriculum, and you're able to use this in a classroom setting or either in a mentoring program. And some of the areas of study they talk about is interpersonal communication. They say that interpersonal communication is more important than the public speaking to get them started, to get them used to this one-on-one kind, face-to-face communication. And some of the areas that we all know that would help is in job interviews, different college meetings, school assignments, some of the parent-teacher meetings that the students find themselves in, and just building friendships. We talked earlier in the year, or last year when we first started, we talked about how, with all the digital communication that, we were losing that interpersonal touch. Something else that's pretty interesting, it looks like Toastmasters really did their homework, because one of the things they talk about is this allows teachers to mix and match the interpersonal communication in their curriculum. And I found that to be very interesting, because with all the talk about education and how we need to improve it, I thought this is, excuse me, I thought it's a great enhancement. And one other point is it's geared to help enhance and match up with the different learning standards of the different states and the countries. So again, Toastmasters has done some great homework in this area. And some of the things that come out of this for the students is that really is going to help them is if they can learn how to listen well, because we have two ears to listen, and express themselves with self-control, and also with clarity, and show some tact when they're doing it. It's really going to put them ahead. They're going to progress further in their personal and career as they move forward. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you today. I just thought it was just very timely, and it was great. And while I'm on that subject, Warren Buffett, he spoke, I don't know, it's been maybe a couple years ago. He and Bill Gates spoke at Columbia University, And he was asked what was the one thing that a person could do to make themselves successful. And he was talking to some MBAs at the Columbia University. And he told them that he thought communication skills was the number one thing. He said he felt like that it could change your income level 50%, increase your value. So there again, there's just many people that believe and understand that this whole communication piece is critical. And once again, I like the way the Toastmasters with this new youth program is talking about the interpersonal part first, and then we move on to the public speaking. With that, I'd like to move on to our guest. We have a guest here that's one of our local Toastmasters. His name is Alan Portnoy. Did I pronounce that right, Alan?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
All right, sir. Anyway, glad to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here.
Okay. Well, anyway, Alan is a certified public accountant. He's located on the far east side of Columbus. He's more than 11 years of experience as an accounting director, auditor, and tax preparer, and has been licensed since 2003. Alan started his own practice in 2010 and works with individuals, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations. His mission is to help others and focus on the needs of his clients in order to help them reach their personal and business goals. On Tuesday, which is tomorrow, is that right, Alan?
That is
tomorrow.
Correct. Tomorrow.
It's here, okay. Alan will be opening up an office in Grove City. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Alan has been a member of the 5 Points Toastmasters in Bexley for 1 year. He was approximately 1 year. He was a founding member and the first to finish his Competent Communicator Manual. And for those of you that don't know, there's 10 projects in that manual, and believe me, it takes a lot of dedication to get that done in a timely manner.
Sure does.
Anyway, Alan, I'd like for you to go ahead and talk to us today about give us your testimonial on why you joined Toastmasters.
Yes, well, again, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I was the 5 Points Club is part of an offshoot of a program at Jewish Family Services called the Success Program. And the purpose of that program is to help people who are in transition and through resume writing, business coaching in general. And it's funded by a federal grant, and if you qualify, then it's free. And I've been through the program twice. And I had been giving, last year I had given a speech. I wanted to give a speech, and short version is that I wanted to, we came up with the idea to open my own practice. It's unusual, but it made sense for me based on what I did.
Yeah.
And I had been thinking about Toastmasters for a while. The closest one to me is the Whitehall chapter, but I was always afraid to go over there. And then the Success Program said, we're going to do this. And so I had no more excuses. That's how I ended up joining.
Okay.
But what Toastmasters has given to me, number one, as you talked at your beginning about interpersonal communication.
Right.
That to me, I used to do radio way back when. And to do this, you can learn how to work on the radio. But to speak one-on-one with a person and to do it without thinking, that was always difficult. So by doing prepared speeches and talking more gave me a way to improve. I knew I'd be able to work with potential clients that way, to stay on point instead of going off on a tangent, and a way to give back. And that's the purpose of my entire practice. And and when you mentioned I was the first one to become a competent communicator, no one honestly was stepping up to the plate, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity. If no one's going to volunteer, I'm going to volunteer every week and do a speech. And that's what I did. And so I think we founded the club in December of 2010. I was going to say last year. I already passed that.
Sure enough.
And I did it in, I think, 9 or 10 months.
Right.
And the last 5 I did in about 3 months. And it's just a matter if you just got to do it. And that was my thing. And it's just been great for me. And people outside of Toastmasters have told me that they can see the improvement.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and get into your topic. And we're calling this today, Taxes, Taxes, Taxes. Alan's going to share with you some of his expertise. And Go ahead and get started, sir.
Yes, to get started. Oh, sure.
Okay, Alan, just a few questions, please.
Sure.
Okay, so to start us off, it's like, what is the biggest change from the tax perspective?
I'll tell you just a second, Julia. I do have to read this disclaimer, and you'll hear that in just a second. But in accordance with regulations issued by the Internal Revenue Service, please be advised to all our listeners that the extent the communications provided today, that if they contain any tax advice, such advice is not intended or written to be used and cannot be used by any taxpayer for the purpose of avoiding penalties that may be imposed on a taxpayer for following the advice. The reason I had to tell you about this is, to me, the biggest change, and it's been over a 2-year period, and a lot of people won't talk about it, is now that all people who prepare tax returns for a fee have to be registered with the IRS. Very briefly, the first time I gave a speech was December 2010. Finished the speech, and a gentleman comes up to me, hands me his card, and says, if you need any help, let me know. And it just said, John Doe Tax Preparer. Prior to January 1, 2011, anyone could prepare a tax return and charge you a fee for it. The IRS had started to do studies and realized they started to put some things together. And so starting this year's the second year of all people are required to be registered. The first thing is all people had to get what they call a preparer tax ID number. It was originally done so you didn't put your Social Security number out there. So I had one for years and it was free. So the IRS said, well, we want you to put something toward that, so it cost $64.25. The estimates were there anywhere from 900,000 to 1.2 million tax preparers at the end of 2010. At the end of 2011, it was down to 700,000. And 100,000 of those didn't register, and the IRS is going after those people. That was the first requirement. The second requirement is that people outside of CPAs, such as myself, enrolled agents, attorneys, and licensed actuaries have to pass a test. And that has started to be done, and I fully expect that that's going to cut down the number of preparers. The third thing is that people who don't have their own continuing education requirements are going to have that, 15 hours a year, combining updates, tax topics, and ethics. That's the biggest thing. And there's always something at the bottom of your return. Is the person willing to basically represent you before the IRS? Can you talk to a third party? If the person says no, that's not a good idea to use them. I'm required to. That's the biggest difference.
Right. Okay.
So the change is very significant.
Yes.
So the requirements that they are needed, we'll go back over this again, the requirements that they are needed to make sure these people understand and know, they need a tax ID number.
It's called it's known as a P10, but it's their own ID number.
And be enrolled, and they have to take a test?
Right. That's okay. If you want to be paid for it. If you volunteer to do it, that's fine. There's another change. This year, if you prepare 10 returns or more, they must be electronically filed.
Okay, so that there are people out there who are going to attempt to try to take care of someone else's taxes this year, they better think twice.
Pretty much. Yes, there was studies done, and a lot of this got back to, you remember not too long ago, there was a big thing with this refund anticipation loans. Part of this was done as a study. One of the things they did is putting in these regulations. They got public comment, and literally in all the questions they asked, 95 to 98% of the people said, yes, we want people registered, and we want other requirements. But they found 2004, with a lot of this was with refund anticipation loans. A good portion of the people offering this were not necessarily tax preparers. You could go almost anywhere, and they'd open a little desk, and they'd fill it out for you, and they found people weren't doing it right. And this is where it all started. It's now developed into this. But it's really, to me, a big deal because the IRS did a study, found that about 80% of people, it says 94% of tax preparers, and this was done in 2006, who use tax return preparers generally follow their advice. 62% of taxpayers said they follow their tax return preparer's advice all the time. And the third thing was 80% of the people now use either a preparer or electronic software. All of this together has led to where we are now.
Interesting information. Regarding local taxes, I have several questions for you.
My favorite subject.
What is the general rule of thumb, and what are the changes to local rates, if any?
A general rule of thumb that I was taught is that you pay your local taxes where you work, but you file your return where you live. The easiest example is if you live and work in Columbus, no problem. You pay 2.5% local tax, and that's what you file. For 2010, I'll just use that because there were some changes. If you lived in Whitehall and worked in Columbus, it was 2.5%. You paid that in. It was only 2% in Whitehall. There's a 1.5% difference. Did you get that money back? No. If it was the reverse, you paid 2% in Whitehall, but you lived in Columbus, then you would be responsible for that extra 0.5%. And now keep in mind, and I'll talk about it a little later, and I'll talk about that a little later, but and it gets really interesting. I would say I'm one of the few people who's willing to talk about local taxes in public. It's one of those things where a good registered tax return preparer knows about this stuff.
Okay, so the employer, they really have to hold out local taxes, don't they, for your city?
They should. Now, in a situation where I mentioned with Whitehall and Columbus previously, the employer is only required to hold out the amount of local tax in the city that they are based in. So you can request the employer, could you hold out an extra 0.5% because I live in Columbus? They are not required to. If they do, great. However, it is ultimately your responsibility to pay your taxes, no matter what it is. So, and that's why you get with a good, whether it's a CPA, a good tax attorney, or enrolled agent, or a registered tax return preparer who has showed that they are competent in what they're doing.
Now, can you explain how the tax credits work?
Yes.
So that people will understand that.
Yeah. Tax credits for purposes of local taxes, as you can imagine, the cities don't exchange local tax money. Obviously, I'd never have to worry about work, but it would just be too much of a burden. Therefore, the cities give credits. Columbus is easy because they get so much revenue. If you work somewhere else, say you work in Reynoldsburg, they'll give you 100%. It's 100% credit. Now, Pickerington was the example that we were taught to use. Pickerington is a 1% local tax. However, if you lived in Columbus, for example, and worked in Columbus, live in Pickerington, Pickerington would only give you a credit of up to 50% of its tax. So the most you would get is 0.5%. So in this example, you'd pay 2.5% local tax to Columbus, and then because Pickerington only would give you 1/2 of 1% credit, you'd have to send an extra 0.5% to the city of Pickerington. Now Pickerington, like many of the counties in Fairfield, many of the counties in Licking, have a school district tax. So now you got to pay an extra 1% for school district, and your employer doesn't have to hold that out if you don't live in the area. So that's 4%. Now the strangest example is Pataskala. Prior to July 2010, people were moving to Pataskala because there was no city tax. Pataskala, I think it was passed 1% tax. However, they give no credit. So you work in Columbus, you live in Pataskala, 2.5% to Columbus, you owe the 1% to Pataskala, and you have a 1% school district tax. 4.5%. And if your employer doesn't cover it, that's 2% that you have to make sure that you pay in.
Wow.
Now, if you live in a township, too bad. I mean, you don't get any of it back. And there's a number of ways out there to figure out exactly where you are. when I was taught how to do tax, the best thing was we used to look at maps. So many of our listeners know where Independence Village is at Bryson Tussing. That is a Reynoldsburg mailing address, if I remember correctly, Columbus City, but you're in the Groveport-Madison School District. So just because you have a mailing address does not mean that's what your tax is for purpose of local tax.
Wow. Wow.
It's crazy.
Yes, it is. Well, can you give us just kind of a little bit of a wrap up as to what we need to know and listeners need to know as we go forth here?
Yes. A couple things I did bring up. There are changes in local rates for 2011. In Whitehall, for example, raised its local tax rate to 2.5%. So for whatever reason, if that wasn't paid in, you got to make sure the extra 0.5% is paid in. This year, Bexley voters, starting as of yesterday, they passed a 0.5% local tax. So now the income tax rate is 2.5%. And if memory serves, you only get an 80% credit if you work outside Bexley. So whatever that calculation is, you're going to have to add that back. You're going to have to add that as well. And then the other ones, Worthington's up to 2.5%. Well, that was in July 2010, so it was the whole year. I mentioned Pataskala. If you happen to work in Delaware, that went up to 1.85 last year. Bexley's the only one I've seen in the area that went up. I think everything else has stayed the same. And again, as I said earlier, if someone who's not if it's outside of the CPA, enrolled agent, if you go to the big box, most of those people have been trained. But if someone just comes up to you and wants to do your taxes, you've got to find out if they're actually registered. That would be the big thing. And most important, that they definitely know what's going on. The biggest thing in local tax, and I have some clients that has happened to, there's no statute of limitations. I'm working with someone now where one of the municipalities has gone back to 1998.
Wow.
Because they're all need revenue.
Wow.
That's what it all comes down to.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, and I hope that the information that you have given will be able to help our listeners out there as they get ready for tax time, headache time for a lot of people. And for some, it's a breeze. Now, T. Wayne, I need to hear a few words from you.
Yeah, I was driving on the highway in Atlanta last week. I was down to visit for Christmas, and I saw a billboard, and I think as we go into 2012, this was kind of some good advice, something to think about. And it said at the top, it showed the recession, and then it says, "This is a test, not a final exam."
I like that. Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for being with us as we're starting out our new program for 2012. And to all of you out there who have been listening, and for you that have just tuned in to our program just today, if you have any ideas or suggestions, whether they're positive or negative, for the Community Table Talk program, be sure to email the station and let them know. We greatly appreciate it, because we'd like to bring you information and programs that are going to be very interesting for you as we go through the year. And one last thought. Remember, as you start through and continue to go through 2012, remember to dream, love, hope, and inspire. It'll be good for your body. You have been listening to WCRX-LP Columbus, Ohio, 102.1 FM, the broadcast radio service of the Bexley Public Radio Foundation. And our website, for those of you who have comments and suggestions, is WCRXLP.com. We look forward to talking with you again next week when our guest will be Mr. Dwight Lennox, a well-known musician here in our city and surrounding areas.